The party before the wedding. The week leading up to the wedding was intense, exhausting, but in that exciting, adrenaline-fueled way where everything feels like it's coming together. After months of planning, we were finally in the home stretch. The venue was booked, flowers arranged, our family members flying in from different corners of the country. Each day was packed with final preparations, cake tastings, meetings with vendors, going over seating charts for the 100th time. It was hectic, but we were riding the high of knowing we were about to embark on the next chapter of our lives together. She seemed as excited as I was, maybe more. We'd have these quiet moments at night, collapsing on the couch, too tired to even talk. But then she'd look at me, her eyes sparkling, and say, "I can't believe we're getting married in a few days." And I'd smile because I couldn't believe it either. I felt so lucky, like I had hit the jackpot, like everything in my life had led to this perfect moment. Then came the bachelorette party. Her friends had been planning it for weeks, possibly months. They had rented a cabin a few hours out of town, and I remember her buzzing with excitement in the days leading up to it. "Just one last girls' weekend before I become a married woman," she said with a playful grin. She didn't seem too concerned about the wedding prep that night. She promised me she'd be back the next day, refreshed and ready to dive back into the final details. I trusted her, of course. Why wouldn't I? We'd been together for years, and I had never once had a reason to doubt her. In my mind, this was just a silly tradition, one final hurrah before we officially sealed the deal. The morning of the party, she was in high spirits. She packed her bag with the usual essentials, throwing in a few extra dresses at her friends' insistence, just in case they decided to hit up some bars after dinner. I remember laughing as she spun around in the mirror, trying on different outfits. She had this lightness about her, a carefree energy that made me fall in love with her all over again. "You look amazing," I said, and I meant it. She kissed me, told me she'd call me before bed, and then she was out the door, flashing me a smile that melted my heart. I spent the evening at home, tying up a few loose ends for the wedding. It was strange being in the house alone, knowing we were so close to the biggest day of our lives. I figured I'd hear from her later, maybe around midnight when the party started winding down, and for a while everything seemed fine. Around 10 p.m., I got a few texts from her. They were full of excitement, like always. "Having so much fun," she wrote. "The girls say hi. Miss you." I smiled, happy that she was having a good time, and texted her back with a quick, "Love you. Don't stay out too late." She sent a kiss emoji and promised she wouldn't. It was a small thing, but it made me feel connected to her, even though she was hours away, celebrating with her friends. I watched TV for a while, flipping through channels but not really paying attention to anything. After a long week, my body was craving rest, so I ended up crashing on the couch earlier than expected. I figured she'd call or text when she got back to the cabin, but when I woke up in the middle of the night and checked my phone, there was nothing. That's when a small flicker of worry crept in. It wasn't like her to stay out late without letting me know. She had always been good about keeping in touch, especially during a night out. I told myself she was just caught up in the fun and would reach out in the morning. But still, I sent her a quick text, something like, "Hope you're having a blast. Miss you." No response. The next morning, I woke up early, groggy from a restless sleep. I checked my phone again, but there were still no messages from her. My gut started to twist a little, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just sleeping in after a late night. I went through my morning routine, but I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. By noon, I finally broke down and called her. No answer. I texted her again. Nothing. My mind started spinning, imagining all sorts of scenarios. Had something happened to her? A car accident on the way back? Maybe she'd lost her phone or it died. I was trying to stay calm, to not let my imagination run wild. She was probably fine, I told myself, just hungover, sleeping it off. But the longer I went without hearing from her, the more anxious I became. Finally, around 2 p.m., she called me. I could hear the noise of the car in the background, her friends laughing and talking. "Hey babe, sorry I didn't text. It was a late night, and I crashed at the cabin. We're just now heading back." she said, her voice upbeat, almost too casual. You good? I felt the tension in my chest release. She was fine. Everything was fine. Yeah, I was just a little worried. That's all, I said, trying not to sound too relieved. Glad you're okay. She laughed. Of course. Everything's good. I'll be home soon, and we can get back to wedding stuff. I can't wait. And just like that, my worry faded. I told myself I was overreacting, that everything was normal. I chalked it up to wedding jitters, my mind playing tricks on me because we were so close to the big day. When she got home that evening, everything felt as it always had. We were affectionate, we talked about the party, and she seemed genuinely excited about the wedding again. She even showed me some pictures from the night, laughing as she pointed out her friends acting silly in them. She looked radiant, happy, and completely at ease. But there was something in her eyes. A flicker, a momentary hesitation when I asked her how the night had gone. She told me it was fun, that they had a few drinks, danced, and then headed back to the cabin to sleep. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Looking back now, that flicker, that tiny moment of hesitation, stands out like a red flag I didn't want to see. But in the whirlwind of wedding preparations, I pushed it aside, convinced that nothing could go wrong between us. After all, we were just days away from our perfect wedding. The wedding and the first year. The wedding day arrived like a dream. From the moment I woke up, everything felt surreal. The house filled with the smell of fresh flowers, my suit hanging by the door, the early morning light casting soft shadows through the window. My heart was pounding with anticipation, but in the best possible way. Today was the day. Today I was going to marry the woman I loved more than anything. I remember standing at the altar, nervous but excited, watching her walk down the aisle. She was breathtaking. Her dress, simple but elegant, flowing like water with each step. Her hair was pinned back in soft curls, and when our eyes met, she gave me that smile, the one that had always melted me from the inside out. In that moment, any lingering doubts I had from that bachelorette weekend melted away. She was mine and I was hers. This was how it was meant to be. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter and a few happy tears. We exchanged vows, the kind you write when you're so sure of forever. I promised to love her, to stand by her side, to build a life with her. She promised the same. Her voice shook a little, but I thought it was just nerves. We kissed, and the world disappeared for a second. The crowd, the noise, everything. It was just us, standing at the edge of our new life together. The reception was magical. We danced, laughed with friends and family, and for those few hours, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Every detail had fallen into place, the food, the music, the speeches. Her father gave a touching toast, saying how happy he was to welcome me into the family. My friends pulled me aside, joking about how I was officially off the market. But I didn't care. I had found my person. When the night was over, and we finally had a moment alone, she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I love you. I can't wait for forever with you." It felt like the perfect ending to a perfect day. The honeymoon in Italy was everything we dreamed of. Romantic dinners in small Italian cafes, long walks through the winding streets of Rome, lazy afternoons in Tuscany sipping wine and talking about our future. We laughed so much, stayed up late watching the stars, and made love like we were the only two people in the world. She seemed completely at ease, happy, as if there wasn't a care in the world. I kept thinking, this is it. This is what happiness feels like. I didn't want those 2 weeks to end. But life has a way of creeping back in. When we returned, the reality of everyday responsibilities hit fast and hard. The first year of marriage was a whirlwind of settling into routines, balancing work, finding time for each other, figuring out how to blend our lives even more than we already had. There were good days, filled with laughter and easy conversation, and then there were days when we barely spoke, too tired from work to do anything but collapse on the couch. Still, I thought we were fine. No, more than fine. We were happy, or at least I was. Sure, there were little things, her moodiness every now and then, her occasional late nights out with friends, but I didn't think much of it. She was busy with work, and I had my own stresses. We were adjusting to married life. Everyone told us the first year could be hard, that it took time to settle into a rhythm. For the most part, though, everything seemed normal. We celebrated our first Christmas as a married couple by buying a tree together, decorating it while sipping hot cocoa and listening to holiday music. On New Year's Eve, we kissed at midnight, our friends cheering around us, and I made a mental note to appreciate these little moments more. She seemed happy. We both did. But every now and then, I'd catch these small glimpses of something else. A distance in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, or the way she'd avoid answering certain questions when I asked how her day had gone. It was subtle, so subtle I convinced myself it was nothing. We were both busy, after all, and marriage wasn't always supposed to be fireworks and romance every day. Sometimes it was just getting through the day together. I remember the first time I really started to question things was around the 1-year mark. It was a small, almost insignificant moment, but it stuck with me. We were sitting at dinner one night, just a regular Tuesday. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual, responding to texts with this nervous smile I hadn't seen before. I asked her, "Everything okay? You seem off." She looked up, a little startled, like I had caught her in the middle of something. Then she quickly smiled and said, "Oh yeah, sorry, just work stuff." She reached across the table, taking my hand, and gave it a squeeze. "I'm fine, promise." And that was it. I didn't press. I didn't think much of it because why would I? I had no reason to doubt her. But that night, after she fell asleep, I found myself replaying the scene over in my head. Something about the way she had brushed me off, the way she had smiled just a little too quickly, felt off. But I told myself I was being paranoid. We were fine. We had to be fine. Over the next few months, little things like that happened here and there, small moments of disconnection that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Sometimes she'd be out later than usual, saying she was catching up with friends after work. Other times, she'd seem distant, like she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. But when I asked, she'd always assure me that everything was fine, that I was imagining things, and I believed her. It wasn't until our 1-year anniversary that I felt that nagging doubt again. But this time, it hit harder. We had planned a weekend getaway, just the two of us, back to the same cabin where we had spent one of our first weekends together when we started dating. It was supposed to be special, a celebration of surviving the first year and looking forward to the years ahead. But she seemed distracted the entire time, distant. When I tried to bring it up, she brushed it off, saying she was just tired from work, that she was stressed about a big project. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was just normal married life stuff. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And yet I stayed quiet. I didn't push. I didn't dig deeper, because a part of me was afraid of what I might find if I did. So I pushed the doubts down, forced myself to smile, and tried to enjoy the weekend. After all, we had made it through the first year. That had to mean something, right? Little did I know, the truth would come crashing down soon enough. And when it did, it would shatter everything I thought I knew. The confession. It had been a long, uneventful day when the truth came out. One of those quiet evenings where you sink into the comfort of routine, thinking everything is perfectly ordinary. The sky outside was starting to dim as I sat on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels. My wife was in the kitchen, casually moving around as she prepared dinner. There was no reason to suspect that anything was off. In fact, I remember feeling content, settled into the rhythm of married life. But looking back, I can see now that something had shifted. She had been quieter than usual, more withdrawn. There were fewer texts during the day, fewer playful comments when we saw each other after work. We had fallen into this routine that felt less like a marriage and more like two people coexisting in the same space. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed she was barely touching her food. She kept glancing at me, then down at her plate, nervously picking at her food with her fork. I could feel the tension building in the room, the unspoken weight hanging between us. I tried to ignore it, told myself that maybe she was just tired. We all have off days, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something she wasn't telling me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, she put her fork down and looked up at me, her eyes wide and full of this strange mix of fear and guilt. My heart skipped a beat, instantly alert to the shift in her demeanor. She took a deep breath, and then, in the softest voice, she said, "I need to tell you something." I froze. I don't know why, but in that moment, I knew whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. My mind raced, trying to figure out what it could be. Maybe she had made a mistake at work or was stressed about something with her family. I couldn't have imagined what was about to come out of her mouth. She swallowed hard, her voice shaky as she continued. "I've been keeping something from you for a long time." Her hands were trembling now, and she couldn't meet my eyes. My stomach clenched. Every muscle in my body went tense as I braced myself for whatever was coming. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice coming out more sharply than I intended. I was scared now, really scared. I could feel the ground beneath me starting to crack, the certainty I'd always had about our life together beginning to crumble. She hesitated, tears already forming in her eyes. "I cheated on you." Those words, just 3 words, but they hit me like a truck. I felt my whole world tilt, like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me in a free fall. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. Cheated? My mind couldn't even wrap around the idea. This woman, the one I had promised to spend the rest of my life with, the one I had trusted with every part of myself, was sitting here telling me she had betrayed me. I couldn't speak. My mouth felt dry, my thoughts swirling in a haze of confusion and disbelief. "When?" I managed to choke out, though I wasn't sure I even wanted to know. She wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself. "It was before the wedding, at the bachelorette party. It only happened once, I swear. But it was with him, my ex, her ex. The guy she had assured me was just a friend when we first started dating. The guy who had popped up in casual conversations over the years, always with a hint of nostalgia that I had never liked but had never questioned. I had trusted her. I had trusted her completely. I felt my heart pound in my chest, my blood roaring in my ears. "You cheated on me before the wedding?" I repeated, my voice breaking. The enormity of it began to sink in, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, suffocating me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was drunk, and it just happened. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to ruin everything. But it's been eating at me, and I couldn't keep it from you any longer." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had stood at the altar with, the one who had looked me in the eyes and promised to love me for the rest of her life, had been with another man just days before we exchanged those vows. And not just any man, her ex, the one guy who had always made me feel a little insecure, a little out of place, even though she swore he was out of her life. "Why now?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and confusion. "Why are you telling me this now? Why did you wait a whole year to say something?" She shook her head, sobbing quietly. "I was scared. I was afraid you'd leave me if you knew. And then we got married and things were good and I thought maybe it didn't matter. But it's been haunting me, and I couldn't live with it anymore. I had to tell you." I felt sick, physically sick. The room spun around me, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I couldn't even look at her. I had spent the last year building a life with her, thinking we were laying the foundation for our future, when all along, she had been carrying this secret. I thought back to our wedding day, the honeymoon, the first few months of married life when everything seemed perfect. Was it all a lie? Had she felt guilty every time she looked at me? I pushed back from the table, needing to get away to think. But thinking was impossible with the flood of emotions crashing over me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, humiliation. I felt like my chest was going to explode, like I couldn't breathe. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic in her voice. "I can't be here right now," I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. "I need to think." I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside. I walked, aimlessly, trying to process what had just happened. Every step I took felt heavier, like I was carrying the weight of our entire relationship on my shoulders, and it was crushing me. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I had trusted her with my whole heart, had believed that what we had was real, and now it was all tainted. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to somehow make it all go away, but another part of me wanted to scream, to break something, to let out the rage that was bubbling just beneath the surface. I wandered the streets for hours, replaying her confession in my head, over and over. Her words echoed like a cruel reminder of how little control I had over the situation. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew us. But now I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Eventually, I found myself standing outside the house again, staring at the door, dreading going back inside. I knew she'd be waiting, probably crying, ready to apologize all over again. But I didn't know if I was ready to hear it. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. Because now everything had changed. The aftermath. When I finally stepped back into the house, the air felt thick, oppressive, as if the weight of her confession had seeped into the walls. She was sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with tears, hands clasped tightly in her lap like she was holding herself together. I stood there in the doorway, not knowing what to say, my mind still reeling from the bomb she had dropped on our life. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel it growing, pushing us further apart by the second. I wanted to ask her why she had let this secret fester inside her for an entire year, why she hadn't told me before the wedding, when there was still time to walk away, before I had made a lifetime commitment under false pretenses. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, the words caught in my throat, strangled by the overwhelming mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to sort through. She finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I snapped. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I spat, my voice dripping with anger I could no longer hold back. "How do you accidentally sleep with your ex just days before your wedding? How do you forget to tell your husband that you cheated on him?" She flinched, as if my words physically struck her. I know it sounds awful, but it wasn't like that. I was drunk, it was a mistake, and I didn't know how to face you. I thought if I just kept it to myself, we could still be happy." Happy? I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. How the hell were we supposed to be happy when you were hiding something like this? You built our marriage on a lie. Every single moment we shared for the past year, every time I looked at you and thought I was the luckiest guy in the world, it was all based on a lie. She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I had always been the one to hold her when she cried, the one to soothe her when she was upset, but this time I couldn't do it. She had caused this. She had shattered the life we had built together, and I wasn't sure if I could ever pick up the pieces. "I love you," she whispered through her tears, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. "Please, you have to believe me. I love you, and I didn't want to hurt you. I've been trying to make it up to you this whole time." I shook my head, my fists clenched at my sides as I fought to keep my emotions in check. "How can you say you love me? You don't betray someone you love like that. You don't look them in the eyes every single day for a year and lie to them. You don't let them marry you when you've done something like this." "I didn't want to lose you," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I thought if I told you, you'd leave me." I stared at her, my chest heaving with the force of my anger and heartbreak. "So what? You figured you'd keep it hidden forever? Let me spend the rest of my life in the dark while you walked around with this secret?" She didn't answer. She just sobbed, her body shaking as she tried to hold herself together. But I couldn't feel pity for her, not now, not after everything. I turned and walked toward the stairs. "I need space," I muttered, my voice strained and hoarse. "I can't do this right now." She called after me, "Please, don't walk away from me." But I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Every fiber of my being screamed for distance, for air, for some sort of reprieve from the suffocating pain that was pressing down on my chest. I went upstairs to the guest room, slamming the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to be happy. We had talked about starting a family, about buying a house in the suburbs, about growing old together. Now, all of that felt like a joke. A cruel joke that had been played on me while I naively believed we had it all. The worst part was, she had confessed. She had ripped the bandage off, but now I was left bleeding, while she sat downstairs, waiting for me to forgive her. How was I supposed to forgive her? How could I ever trust her again? Every memory we had, every kiss, every promise, now felt tainted, overshadowed by this betrayal that I couldn't unsee. I barely slept that night. My mind wouldn't stop replaying her confession, the image of her with him, the thought of her lying to me over and over for the past year. It all felt like too much. By morning, I still didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay. Not now. Maybe not ever. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension. She tried to talk to me, to apologize, to explain, but I couldn't bear to listen. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was the betrayal. I stayed in the guest room, avoiding her as much as possible, burying myself in work and anything that would keep me from thinking about the wreckage of our marriage. She gave me space, but it was obvious she was desperate for some kind of resolution. I just didn't have one to give. One night, a week after her confession, she came into the guest room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I can't live like this," she whispered, standing in the doorway. "I can't stand this silence. Please talk to me. Tell me what you're thinking. Do you hate me? Are you going to leave me?" I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." She took a step toward me, her voice shaking. "I'll do anything. Whatever it takes to fix this, I'll do it. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I looked up at her, and for the first time since the confession, I let myself feel the sadness, the grief of losing what I thought we had. "You already lost me?" I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "The moment you did this, you lost me. I don't know how to come back from this. You broke us." Her face crumpled as she sank to the floor, sobbing. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't move. All I could think about was the lie that had become the foundation of our marriage, the lie that had poisoned everything. I didn't know how to forgive that. I didn't know if I ever could. And deep down, I knew this was the beginning of the end, the breaking point. The days after her confession turned into weeks, each one heavier than the last. We lived like strangers, avoiding real conversations, skirting around each other in the house. There was this suffocating tension that hung between us, and no matter how much space I tried to create, it followed me everywhere. Into my thoughts, into my dreams, into every single second I spent in the same house as her. She tried. I'll give her that. She did everything she could to fix things. She bought books on repairing broken marriages, tried to initiate conversations about what went wrong, suggested counseling. She even started leaving me notes. Apologies, reminders of the good times, promises that she'd never hurt me again. But none of it made a difference. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, felt hollow. How could I talk about moving forward when I was still stuck in the past? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, her and him, together. My mind played out the details of that night, filling in the blanks with scenes that made my stomach churn. I pictured them laughing the way she used to laugh with me. I saw their hands on each other, and every time that image crept into my mind, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I was drowning in it, drowning in the betrayal. I kept replaying our wedding day, the way she had looked at me as we exchanged vows. I wondered how she could stand there, promising me forever when just days before, she had been with someone else. The worst part? She hadn't told me then. She had let me marry her, let me commit my life to her, without giving me the chance to make an informed choice. That felt like the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the lie, the deceit that stretched over an entire year of our lives. I tried to go through the motions, tried to pretend like maybe I could eventually forgive her. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I couldn't look at her without feeling sick. I couldn't sleep in the same bed as her, couldn't hold her, couldn't even kiss her without thinking about him. I had built my life around this woman, and now that life felt like it was crumbling beneath me. The final breaking point came one evening, about a month after her confession. It was late, and I was sitting in the kitchen, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the growing tension that had become the constant backdrop of our lives. She came in quietly, her face pale and drawn, as if she hadn't slept in days. I hadn't either, but at least I had my anger to keep me going. She sat down across from me, her eyes full of this desperate hope I couldn't stand to see anymore. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. I know you're angry, but we have to do something. This silence is killing me." I stared at her, feeling the familiar rush of anger bubbling up again. It was always about her, wasn't it? Her guilt, her feelings, her pain. What about mine? What about everything she had taken from me? "What do you want me to say?" I snapped, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "That I forgive you? That everything's fine and we can just go back to normal? Because we can't." She flinched but didn't look away. "No," she whispered. "I don't expect that. I just want to know if you're even willing to try. I need to know if there's still a chance for us." I slammed my phone down on the table, the sound echoing through the quiet room. "A chance for us?" I laughed, though it was more out of disbelief than humor. "You destroyed us. You destroyed everything when you decided to cheat on me. Do you get that? Do you really understand what you did?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. The words were pouring out now, all the hurt and anger I had been holding in since that night. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice rising. "I trusted you with my life, with my heart, and you threw it away. You cheated on me right before our wedding with the one person I always felt uneasy about, and then you kept it from me. You let me marry you, let me believe that everything was perfect while you carried around that secret for a whole year. How am I supposed to forgive that? How am I supposed to ever trust you again?" She was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. I had kept this bottled up for too long, and now it was all pouring out in one uncontrollable torrent. "You know what I can't stop thinking about?" I said, my voice shaking. "I keep thinking about how many times we've talked about our future. How many times we talked about buying a house, having kids, growing old together. I believed in that. I believed in us. But now it's all a lie. Everything is a lie because you broke it." She looked up at me, her face red and tear-streaked, but I wasn't done. "And you know the worst part?" I asked, my voice lowering to a cold, controlled tone. "I don't even know if I still love you. I thought I did, but now, every time I look at you, I feel like I'm looking at a stranger. You're not the person I married. You're not the person I thought I knew." Her sobs quieted, and she stared at me, stunned by my words. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of everything hanging between us, too heavy to bear. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "So what do we do now? Where do we go from here?" I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. I felt drained, like the last bit of energy had been sucked out of me. "I don't know," I said quietly, "but I can't stay here. Not like this." Her face crumpled again, but she didn't argue. She knew. She knew as well as I did that we had reached the breaking point, and there was no coming back from it. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would eventually be okay because it wouldn't. Not after this. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief, anger, relief. I had no idea what the future held. No idea if I could ever move on from this. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. I walked away from the life I had once believed in, not knowing if I'd ever find a way to rebuild it. The end of us. The day I walked out, something in me shattered. I didn't feel the immediate sense of freedom I thought I would. Instead, It felt like I was dragging the weight of a failed marriage behind me, every step heavier than the last. I spent the first few days in a haze, staying with a friend, trying to keep my mind from spinning out of control. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop replaying everything. Her confession, the betrayal, the hurt in her eyes as I left. The silence between us became suffocating. She didn't reach out at first, maybe giving me the space I had asked for, or maybe not knowing what to say. I didn't call her either. What could I even say? What was there left to say when the foundation of everything we had built was crumbling beneath our feet? I found myself sitting alone a lot, thinking back to the early days, when everything was simple, when I trusted her completely, when I thought our love was unbreakable. How had we gone from those happy, carefree days to this? How had everything unraveled so quickly, so unexpectedly? I started seeing a therapist, hoping to make sense of the mess in my head. I couldn't think straight. One minute I hated her with every fiber of my being, and the next, I missed her so much it hurt. I missed her laugh, her smile, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch after a long day. But then the memories of what she'd done would come flooding back, and the rage would rise all over again. The therapist told me that it was normal, grieving, she called it, the death of a relationship, the loss of the future I had imagined. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like I was trapped in this endless cycle of pain and anger, with no way out. A few weeks passed before she finally reached out. She sent a message asking if we could meet, if we could talk. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me didn't want to see her, didn't want to face the reality of what we had become. But a bigger part of me knew that we couldn't keep avoiding this. We needed closure one way or another. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one we used to go to when we first started dating. The familiarity of it made the situation even more surreal, like I was stepping into a place that no longer belonged to me. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, nervously twisting her wedding ring around her finger. When she saw me, she gave a small, hesitant smile, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. We sat there in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything hanging between us, too thick to cut through. Finally, she spoke. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. "I didn't know if you would." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to speak yet, not without the anger bubbling up again. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she placed them on the table. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am, for everything." I stared at her, my heart twisting in my chest. I could see the regret in her eyes, the pain she was carrying. But no amount of regret could undo what had been done. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said quietly, my voice rough. "You lied to me for an entire year. You let me believe everything was perfect, and all the while you were hiding something that destroyed us." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even after what happened, I loved you every day." Her words cut through me, sharper than I expected. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that some part of what we had was still real, still worth saving. But I couldn't. The betrayal had changed everything. Love wasn't enough anymore. I shook my head, looking down at the table, my hands clenched into fists. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You can love someone and still destroy them." We sat in silence for a long time after that, the enormity of the situation settling in. We had been in love once, so deeply in love that I thought nothing could ever come between us. But we had underestimated the damage that secrets could do, the way trust, once broken, could never truly be repaired. Finally, she spoke again, her voice shaking. "Do you think there's any way at all we could move past this?" I looked up at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. I knew my answer, and it was one of the hardest things I had ever had to say. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I can't move past this. I can't forgive what you did, and I can't forget it. Every time I look at you, I'll always see him. I'll always see the lie. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry. But this time, I didn't reach out to comfort her. Couldn't. I had nothing left to give. We had reached the end of the road, and there was no way to turn back. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was apologizing to her or to myself for what we were losing. But it's over. I can't be with you anymore. She nodded through her tears, knowing it was the truth, even if it hurt. I understand, she whispered. I'm so sorry. We parted ways that day, and as I walked away from the cafe, I felt this strange sense of finality settle over me. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was more like the closing of a door, the end of a chapter one had once believed would last forever. The weeks that followed were hard, but in a different way. I started the process of moving on. Divorce papers, splitting up our lives, figuring out how to live without the person who had once been my entire world. It was painful, no doubt about that, but there was also something freeing about it. I had spent so long stuck in the limbo of hurt and betrayal, and now, finally, I was walking away from it. I don't know what will come next. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone the way I trusted her. But I do know that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of her mistake. I couldn't keep holding on to a future that was built on a lie. Maybe one day, I'll look back and remember the good times, the love we shared before it all went wrong. But for now, I'm letting go of the pain, the anger, the dreams we once had. And as hard as it is, I know it's the only way forward. Because sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how much you want to believe in forever, life has other plans.